Hiring today is a broken game. AI writes the job description and AI writes the CV. And both sides feel like they're losing. My guest today is Sam Grill. He is head of quality and support engineering at Equals and Railser. And he's been on both sides of the table, both as a job seeker and also as somebody who runs and builds effective hiring processes. We're going to walk through how candidates can stand out and make the best opportunities of the interviews that they are in, as well as from the hiring manager's point of view, to build great processes that enable you to build brilliant teams. Like every guest, he has left behind something for you to download. It's a set of interview questions in categories, as well as tips for what to look for in the answers that a candidate gives. So it's great from a hiring manager's point of view, but it's also amazing from a candidate's point of view, because when you read this, you can prepare better. So whether you are a job seeker or somebody who's building a hiring process, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Sam, thanks for joining us today. I know that you have built a lot of teams, high-performing teams, and you've seen the hiring process from both sides, both as a job seeker, but also a lot as a hiring manager. And it seems that the process right now is pretty broken. There's a lot of people trying to find work. How do you think the process has changed in recent years?
Well, I think now it's a lot more focused on just getting your foot in the door. So the first thing everybody thinks is, I just need to get that initial engagement. So everything is tailored to what is going to get me in front of the right people so I can at least start the journey. Everybody's so worried about that before they even think about what it is that they might want to get across for the potential roles that they're looking at, or who they're actually thinking about when it comes to hiring. It's all tailored around that initial engagement. And that's just a sign of how competitive roles are these days. I think that's probably the main thing in terms of getting that foothold, and everything is tailored to that. So that's always the hard part. But once you get through, it not a lot has actually changed. The interview processes and a lot of that sort of stuff is still the same, but it's really that initial engagement.
Yeah, and it's almost become quite an art, hasn't it, to read a job description, think, yep, I'm going to go for this, and then craft your CV in the hope that you snake your way through that tiny keyhole, through all of the AI and all of the processes, and actually land up, in front of somebody who can read it and maybe give me a call and welcome me into the interview process. It seems like it's such a small keyhole, though. I know we're going to get into a lot more, later on, but do you think it's still very important that I structure my CV in a certain way to get through?
It is and it isn't. And I think that entirely depends on what sort of application process it is you're looking at. You've got no clue really what is on the other side of that. So there is always a need and a case to say that you should have what I would call like the core of your CV and your application profile in there. But I don't think that is going to serve you beyond that initial entry point, right? So yes, you want to maximize the chances that you're going to get in through that initial door, but you don't want it to be, when it's picked up by a human, the first thing that they read is, a list of different technologies or a list of different things that aren't really going to make you stand out in that process.
Got it. Okay. Now, throughout this conversation, we're going to be thinking about both the job seeker, what they should do, how they should approach the process, but also from the hiring manager's point of view and your ideas around the good process that helps the hiring manager build a great team. But of course, they meet in the middle. So we're going to be talking about it from both points of view. Can we start with the job seeker? What do you think are the biggest mistakes that you see when people are applying for a job?
So I think if we come back to the initial like entry point things and what are the critical things that are going to get you over that first hurdle, the biggest mistake or frustration, at least I have, is when I pick up someone's CV, or I'm, meeting someone for the first time, the last thing that I want to read is all of the things that they've copied and pasted from the job description, or, the things that they've read that they think I want to hear. For me, that shows kind of a little bit of laziness and a little bit of lack of interest, and
Can I
maybe
challenge you a
it's
bit on that? Because some of the
mm,
common advice that you get is look at the job description and
yeah.
load your CV up with the right terms so that you look
Mhm.
like a match. But what
Yeah.
you're saying is you think that's almost lazy.
Well, I think I guess laziness is a direct copy, right? So like maybe you're just saying, okay, in the job description, it says you must be competent with X, Y, and Z tooling. And you in your job description then write, I have used X tool at X job for 5 years. Like that for me is not going to be something that is appealing. It's going to be reading, okay, what did you do with it? How did you do it? What problems did you solve? What's the context of the problems? Because for me, that's the bit that makes you stand out, right? It's what have you done with those particular tools or those particular skills that have actually made you grow or made you develop or made you a standout in your particular area of expertise. So it's
So
really
what
taking
I'm,
it.
what I'm hearing is that instead of just saying, yeah, I did it, tick box, you go beyond and you describe the impact that you made with it.
Yes, exactly, and that's a hard thing to do in an A4 side of paper or in a 2 minute conversation or however long you've got. Um, so I think that's really the art of it, right? Is how do you get the most information and the most concise point into something that is relevant and impactful for the person that's going to be reading it, and that's ultimately the other challenge, right? It's like you never know who is going to be reading it. It might be a panel of people, it might be the hiring manager, it might be just the recruiter, it might be you never know. So it's impossible to tailor it to a specific person, but what you can do is deliver on your strongest points on the areas that are the core things and are going to be minimally required.
That makes total sense. And then from a hiring manager's point of view, and I think it's tough right now to be a hiring manager because, and I'm sure we'll cover this a few times, but you open up a role and you're going to get hundreds of applicants. And I know that a lot of it will be sifted out before it reaches you, but you're still going to have way more volume than you used to have. But still, what are the biggest mistakes that hiring managers make when they're faced with this difficult world?
In terms of sort of mistakes that people make, I think for the hiring manager, a lot of it is in the prep and the buy-in. So if you think about your immediate circle of people that you're going to be working with when you come to hiring for a specific role, it's going to be, your talent partners, going to be, the teams that you're looking to hire into. It's going to be the colleagues that they're going to be working with. And having a really strong plan of what it is you think you are looking for, getting the investment up front from those sorts of people. I think everybody being on the same page when it comes to hiring way ahead of before the job ad even going out is probably the mistake that people make in terms of that lack of prep.
No, I think that's great advice. Again, from my experience, the more time you spend briefing and then finessing in the early parts, just makes the rest of it easier. And you can investigate each candidate for the things that you're looking for, not just for yourself, but for the role and, as you say, the people that they're going to work with. One of the things that you have talked about when we were planning this is, and I'm going to paraphrase and maybe get it slightly wrong, but I won't remember your CV, but I will remember our conversation. Tell me more
Mm.
about that.
So it's probably speaking to a slight frustration in the current world, right? CVs, what makes up a bad CV in my mind is if I come in and I read, I spoke about briefly a moment ago, is a list of things that people list on their CV because they think, okay, I have to say this, but you've not told me why you've put it on there and why I should care about it. It's great that you've learned this tool and it's great that you've done this training or it's great that you've reached outside the box to develop yourself in this area. But unless I get a feeling of why that's going to be of a benefit to you in this role, it's not really, it doesn't bear any weight. It's kind of just taking up space on a page at that point. So I think when I say, I'll remember our conversation, quite often what I mean by that is people then being given the opportunity to give context of why they've put that on there. Maybe they couldn't fit it in their CV for whatever reason, or maybe they didn't feel it was a strong enough point to justify it in their in their personal profile or whatever it might be. But being able to provide that context to a specific role or a specific skill or a specific experience, that's really where I'm going to connect with you as a candidate, because I know that there is now there's meaning and reason behind what you've put there. And I can also deduce from that whether or not it's going to be something, a relevant experience for you in this position, or does it demonstrate certain characteristics that I am interested in as the hiring manager.
Yeah, I've often found that when you do get down to that conversation, you can pick and poke, and sometimes with a bit of testing, you find out that it's not quite what they said, and they're sort of bluffing a bit. But
Yeah.
equally, some candidates are not very good at presenting themselves, and they put down the minimum, and you ask them, and they go, boom! Suddenly, there's way more than just the words say. And coming back to the job seeker's point of view, it very often seems like the hiring manager or the company is in complete control of this process. All I can do really is put my CV in, my application in, and hope. And then I don't quite know what's going to happen in the interview process. And there's like lots of mystery beyond the process. I don't know what you're thinking and what conversations are happening. I don't know when you're going to make a decision. I don't know what you thought of me. If we get the process right, how does that change for everybody? How does it make the job seeker feel better? And how does it make the hiring process better?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember, if we start at the earliest point of that kind of application process, and we're talking about it from the job seeker's perspective, is I think everybody in that chain wants it to be a two-way street of communication, right? Everybody wants it to be, I want to have seamless, as an applicant, I want to have seamless communication with the talent partner, or as a talent partner, I want to have seamless communication with the hiring manager. And as the hiring manager, I want to have seamless communication with either or both. Then what you've got to be doing as a candidate and as an applicant is really teasing out the most impactful information for you that's going to give you the best opportunity when you actually come to apply for a specific role, right? And I think maybe a mistake that I have made in the past is treating initial engagements with hiring managers or with talent partners as maybe a little bit of just an initial conversation and not really as an opportunity to sell myself. I think your initial engagement is always going to be for your most important one. And I think when choosing talent partners to work with as an applicant, casting a wide net is good. So, if I was giving advice to an applicant, I would say, of your recruiter or of your talent partners, say, give me the structure of this interview process. Who am I going to be meeting? What research can I do about them? Or what do you already know about them? What do they care about? Um, what research can I do on this organization? What challenges are they having? So asking loads and loads of questions is a really, really good initial engagement. From that, you will get back something from your talent partner, which will tell you as an applicant, how much do they know? How much, how invested are they in that process, right? And from your conversation with them, that you'll start to build rapport over time, and that will be where you are put forward for specific roles, or you are considered at front of mind when it comes to being placed in certain interview processes.
I see that, and I think you're right. If you are a job seeker, every step along the way is an opportunity for you to promote yourself and not just let it ride and go, yeah, I'll wait till later stages to show off my magic. You've really got to sell yourself at every part. And the final part of the process, of course, is the decision, when everyone involved in the hiring process gets together. And there's all sorts of ways. Maybe we'll touch later on what a good process looks like. But, I know I had my way of doing it. When you get this process right, what does that meeting feel like? How do you make sure that everybody is making the correct decision for both the candidate, but also the company?
Yeah. So I think, it really, that decision-making point is just a sum up and a collation of all of the information that you've gathered throughout the interview process. Re-review all of that data that you've collected. It might be hard analytic data, it might be colloquial data, it might be gut feel from other people, but make sure you've got it all in front of you. And from there, you'll have your own intuition anyway, right? But does your intuition then line up with what is sitting in front of you? If no, then maybe you've got to spend a little bit more time either trawling over the data that's sat in front of you, or doing a bit of a a deeper thought in terms of your own, actually, is this what I'm actually looking for? But once you've got those two things in alignment, then it should be pretty clear on the decision that you're going to make. Is it a yes or is it a no? And, I think from the interview process, one of the things that I always ask for is, okay, from you, the panel, other people that have interviewed or other people that you've spoken to, I need a summation of what you thought of the person and then an ultimate yes, no. Because then you've got two data points, right? You've got a hard binary kind of decision, and you've also got colloquial informal data. Quite often, I will pick and choose depending on the challenge that I'm having with it, the final kind of decision making process. Do I need just a firm yes, no, or do I need something to kind of validate what I am feeling in terms of my gut feel? So once I have all that information, it's very much just okay, I'm in alignment, I know my decision, and I'm confident in it. And if you're confident in your decision, the steps that follow in terms of bringing that person into the organization also then unravel with more ease.
Can I dive into that a bit more? So you mentioned there that you might need to go and convince other people of your decision. And then maybe, let's just say there are 3 people in that decision meeting. And let's just say that 2 people say yes and one person says no. Does that no rule the candidate out? If you're one of the yeses and you feel strongly it's a yes, do you override the no? Like how do you handle a split decision?
Yeah, I think this is ultimately why I want to collect both that data, right? It's like no, and this is why it's a no. Um, if that no, because sometimes what will happen is someone will say no, and you'll uncover that maybe they are actually assessing this person against a different set of criteria than you are, right? And they might have picked up on something that maybe you haven't picked up on. And there's a couple of ways that you can handle that, but you should never dismiss either the no from the person outright or the no on behalf of the candidate based on a single skim over the reasoning. If it is a no because of the different criteria, then maybe you want to challenge that person on why they think that criteria is important versus maybe why you haven't. And are they just bringing a different perspective to the same things that you saw, and maybe they're uncovering something that you've missed or a blind spot, which is ultimately why they're there in the first place, right? And I never take someone saying no to a candidate that I'm interested in as a negative. It's more of a, what have I missed? And you've got to have people on that panel whose opinions that you fundamentally trust or who are integral to that process. But no, you should never dismiss it out of hand. I think ultimately, if you still feel in your gut that this person is absolutely right for the role, and you would back them to the hilt, then you should still go for it. And that's the most important thing, is having conviction in that person. And if anything, where there is a little bit of doubt and you still feel like it's a strong yes, then that's a really good sign for that candidate, because you know that you're making the decision that you should make. In terms of convincing people internally, it's just about explaining your stance. Why, you may have said up front, I'm looking for this, 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 and this. And for me, this candidate ticked all of the boxes. And, you've had a longer engagement with this process and more time to think about it than perhaps a third party panelist coming in at a different stage. So it can be a case of saying, over time, okay, this person, I think once they get embedded in the company, will do these things and we'll set these targets for them. And let me give you some confidence that these are the things that we'll be measuring them against and that we'll be tracking. So, it's just about that open line of communication internally, really, if there is any doubt, and give the candidate and the person that you ultimately end up hiring their best opportunity to put their best foot forward. And, there's no harm in having that, right? It's you could say to the person when they're inevitably successful, here's what you're going to do in your first couple of weeks, but it's really important we focus on demonstrating X, Y, and Z so that we can, bring in, I would never say to a candidate, this person was skeptical of you, of course, but, it's important that you demonstrate these qualities around these people, and that lets them get off with the best foot possible.
And it loops back to what we talked about earlier, which is if you're really clear at the beginning about the requirements and what you're looking for, actually that decision meeting should be, does the person meet what we were looking for? And it should never be sort of a personal opinion, really. It should be based on that data. Let's move forward now into your how-to part. Like every guest on this show, you've brought along with you a digital asset, something that the audience can download and use straight after this show. Now, what you've brought along is a really excellent list of interview questions that a hiring manager can ask, as well as some tips for what to look for in the answers. Before we get into the detail, how do you see people using your asset?
Yeah, so it's structured in a way that you ultimately want to reverse engineer the interview process to be, okay, here are the things, here are the outcomes that I want to see from this candidate, or the traits that I want to identify in the person, or the answers that I want to hear, and which questions and which narratives and which conversations are going to allow me to like uncover that as quickly as possible. And the reason I've gone with this as the artifact really is I feel uh, the most effective hiring process for me is one that is short, sharp, and efficient. And to have that sort of process, really what you need is to be maximizing your time with the candidate or the candidate's time with you, asking the questions that are going to be the most poignant to get to what you need to know about the candidate. And those could vary between candidates for the same role. You might ask of someone, a specific set of questions that maybe it wasn't clear from their CV or from their first kind of engagement with talent partners or whoever it might be. So, there's a bit of scope to flex. But what I wanted to give both applicants and candidates is really a sense of, okay, if it's maybe a more stock question that everybody wants to ask because they feel it's important, then how do you maximize asking that question in a way that you're going to still induce something from the candidate or recognize certain characteristics of an answer that are going to be useful to you? Because the biggest mistake you can make is going in and asking questions because you think you have to ask the questions and not asking them because you know what you want to get out of it, right? So really, it's a bit of a cheat sheet on what does a good answer look like, what does a bad answer look like, and how do you maximize that time with that question.
And of course, there's many more questions on there than you would ask in an interview. So, as a hiring manager, what's your process for saying? And forgive me, I'm not quite sure how many questions we have. Let's just say there are 30 questions. Which 3 or 5 should I pick out to ask? And presumably, you'd ask every candidate the same questions to keep it fair, would you? How do you pick the right questions for this particular interview?
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, with the prep work, one of the things that I would do is with partners or with people internally, I say, okay, here are the skills that I need, here are the characteristics that I need, and here are the questions that I think are going to give us the best shot of uncovering those traits in those people. So, up front, it might be a question about, or it might seem like a pretty banal question of give me a time where you had to convince a stakeholder to release or not release or something like that. And really understanding what the point of that question is, you're looking for skills like diplomacy, you're looking for skills like communication, you're looking for skills like risk assessment for something a little bit more practical. And once you know that that's what the crux of the question is about, or you've got a sense that that's what the crux of the question is about, then as an applicant or as an interviewer, as an applicant or as a candidate, you're really saying, okay, well, what's my best example of being able to deliver on that point so that the interviewer comes away with what they need from that question? So you can pick 5 or 6 and run them across the same interview. I think that's great. And it is important for the fairness aspect. But what you don't want to do is go too far down that road with this sheet and say, okay, well, I'm just going to read through every question until I get to the end of the interview. You still want to allow for flow, because equally, if I expect someone to be genuine and conversational and open in an interview, I can't just fire off questions at them in a way that kind of makes them feel that they've got to just answer. Or I still want it to be conversational, because that still adds value in terms of understanding how people communicate. So yes, there's you could use it in a way that it inspires certain things in you to look for certain answers, but it's not don't just reel off all of the questions from it. Use it as a bit of
I've been
a
in
guide
those
more than a...
I've been in those where it just feels like, I mean, some of the biggest technology companies, I'm not going to mention AWS specifically, but it's just a list of questions, and the interviewers are just almost bored asking them. It was an awful experience, but yeah,
and it's
definitely
miserable.
want to avoid that.
It's miserable. It's miserable it's miserable for me if I would have to do it. It's miserable for the candidate, and really, that's really what turns someone off an interview process, right? Is they say, "Oh, bloody hell, it was just bullet, quick fire questions," and that's not going to give you a reputation. And this is where talent partners are really important, right? So they might get feedback from candidates saying, "Oh gosh, that interview was really horrible," and if they think that those are the sorts of interviews that you're going to conduct. They're going to naturally gravitate to shifting you candidates that are going to reflect that or are going to be able to handle that. Whereas really that might not be the sort of behaviors that you want from people that you're hiring, right?
Yeah. One thing that I love about the artifact that you left is that, sure, it's a great preparation asset for a hiring manager. It's a guide on what questions to ask, but also what to look for in the answers. But I think more importantly, if you're a candidate, you can read it through and say, all right, I now understand some of the questions I might be asked. But more importantly, here's a clue for what people are going to be looking for in my answers. So I think it's really, really great asset for both hiring managers, but also candidates.
Yeah, and I think what people will pick up from the asset, or I hope that they'll pick up from the asset, is that the whole idea behind it is, as the applicant or as the interviewer, really you've got something that you want to get out of that question. So it's for the applicant to understand, okay, I'm not just being asked this because it's a stock interview question. They've got the interviewer's got an idea in their head of what they expect to hear with that answer. And the more you know about the interviewer, and the more you know about their challenges and their environment and their context, the better you are going to be able to do at tailoring your answer to their specific context. And I think as part of the preparation, as an applicant, you want to understand that. You want to understand their challenges, but equally, you've got points that you want to get across, right? And it's a real skill and an art, and something that you only really nail down over many, many interviews, is how do I tailor my strongest points, and how do I tailor my points of authority that I can talk on to those specific questions, and how do I create that feed in a way that is, it's not forced and it's not jarring, but it is quite genuine. So that's really how a successful interview unfolds, right? Is that people get what they need from the answers, but you've also feel like you've delivered on what you want to get across about yourself.
And I would also say, don't store this up and practice in that one interview for the job that you really want. Do as
Yep.
many interviews as you can, even for jobs you don't particularly want. There's nothing wrong with being offered a job and then saying it's just not quite right for me. But practice as much as you can in real situations before you get to that one that's critical. And if you've done the prep work beforehand, you have a better chance of landing that job.
Completely. And I think that is, it's easier to give a more bespoke or more custom answer where the question's a little bit more specific. But there's nothing to say that any interview that you go to ever might start with a tell me about yourself kind of style question. And the worst thing that you could possibly do is reel off something that it sounds like you've written a pre-prepared speech, because that doesn't set the tone of the interview as a conversation. It sets it as a monologue. And, I've been in interviews before where maybe the first question I've asked is a couple of minutes in, and it's just, tell me a little bit about what you're doing here today, why you're here, why do you want the role? And then 10 minutes later, yes, I've kind of switched off and and the person's gone on and they say, oh, sorry, I've probably gone a little bit long there. It's like, yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But it's not that don't recite what your answers are going to be, because not only does that set you up for failure and that you might not get asked those questions, but also it doesn't create a we're having a conversation sort of tone.
Yeah, I agree with you. I hate those questions. And you can just tell when someone's off and they say, well, my first pet was a cat. Mm. And you go, oh my God, this is going to be like a long answer. And
yeah,
the ones who get it right, who say, they don't just kind of go, well, I'm an engineer. But they've got sort of 20, 30 seconds of, well, I'm an engineer and I used to do this and now I'm doing this. And what I really like to do is this.
Yeah.
And what they do is they give you a platform as an interviewer to say, can we dive into that thing a little bit more, and puts the control back.
And that's a really good point, right? Is like, you want to be able to give your answer in a way that leaves it open for the interviewer to give a follow-up question. And, you want to have delivered on your points, but maybe leave a little bit of room for them to say, okay, they can ask a little bit more detail about this specific thing if that piques their interest. So, a varied but a well-structured answer to certain questions is going to entice a more natural flow to that conversation. So again, it comes back to the thing of not being too prescriptive. And I think I know I've spoken a little bit about maybe, as an engineer coming into a role or someone from a cross-functional team, but it's true of managers and it's true of senior leadership as well, right? Like, what you don't want to do is come across as, I'm going to hog all of the airspace, and because that will portray a certain leadership style or a certain management style. Really, you want to, treat the interview almost as a, let me get what I can get out of you sort of experience, in in that you're showing then your qualities of being able to engage with other people. It's your communication style, and is that going to work in a management or a leadership role at that organization? And that again is a way that you can separate yourself, if it's a transitional role for you, or if it's a role perhaps that you've not interviewed for before.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about the asset. So let's talk first of all about hiring managers. So I have this asset in front of me. It's a list of questions with a list of things to look for in the answers. And we've already talked about the fact that you would select some of the questions, you wouldn't ask them all. How do you see the process working? So let's just create a role. I don't know. Let's not be too specific, but we're hiring for something. Do you get everyone in a room first of all and say, for the role, I think these 3 or 4 questions are the ones that we should all be asking. But for this candidate, maybe these extra 2. How do you see that part of the process?
Well, so what I've tried to do is label up certain questions with certain things that you can really nail into in low level detail on in the answers, or are going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of answers. So an example might be, I'll go back to the example that I used earlier, which is tell me a time where you had to manage stakeholder expectation, blah, 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 blah. And those things are labeled up with risk management. It's labeled up with diplomacy. It's labeled up with communication styles. So what is important to do as the hiring manager is say, okay, these are the things that I care about. These are my most important characteristics and traits that I'm looking for in this person. And that could be from, like a personal level, or it could be a skill set level, whatever it is that you're most interested in. And ensuring that you're picking those questions. And that will give you a good foundation, but don't rely too heavily on it to be your kind of, again, that bullet point list. So when you are listening out for those answers, I don't tend to make notes, but I tend to try and listen to what sort of reaction that stokes in me, right? So if someone says a certain keyword or a certain words in the response, I will try and pull on that and maybe dig a little bit deeper into, let's say the key result here is, the answer is, I would ensure that we've done a proper risk analysis to ensure that we aren't putting certain customers at risk by making X decision, right? And I was like, okay, so you spoke a little bit about risk analysis there. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you go through that? And then you're getting into the detail of the context of their problem, and you're giving them an opportunity to apply context to their actual answer, whereas maybe they would give you a high level structure before. And that's really where you're able to detect the substance and the validity of those sorts of answers, because everybody can talk about them. You might be a great salesman of yourself to a certain degree, but if you can't then back it up with examples, structure and relevant context, then you're going to fall flat. And I think that's particularly true of technical sorts of questions as well, right? If you're going to go, maybe it's a bit more of a engineering focused answer. You might give an overview of how you craft a solution for something, but then if I've got someone, if I've got a principal engineer or an architect, someone on the panel, I would then be looking to them to say, okay, this is your time to kind of jump in and push them to can they back up that statement with firstly opinion. I think opinion is important. It might not be an agreed opinion. I don't think that's a bad thing to happen at an interview. Is a bit of challenge, but as long as you as a candidate can justify why you've given that answer, it's still valid and it's still important.
Yeah. I'd like to pull on a couple of things. You mentioned that you don't take notes in an interview. And I find myself, if I'm doing a telephone interview or a remote interview, I take tons of notes. But it's way more difficult if you're sitting in a room with somebody in person to take notes, because you feel like you want to have the attention on the other person. But I do always find my notes super interesting. I go back through them and there are things in there that, oh yeah, I forgot that. I remember now, I took a note about that thing. There's this red flag that came up, or this green flag that came up. How do you handle that? Because on the one hand, you want to give the attention to the candidate. On the other hand, you don't want to miss stuff.
Yeah. I think if I start to take notes, it's really a preference thing. Like I maybe wouldn't be advising people to not take notes. If that works for you, then you should definitely do it. But for me, it comes back to that preparation, right? I will generally have identified 3 things that I want to know, and throughout the interview, I will be looking for red flag, green flag, to use your language on on those three things. And I will ultimately then say, okay, yep, mental tick, mental tick, mental tick, or mental cross, mental cross, mental cross. But purely because of I want to keep the conversational nature, and that's just my personal style. It's like I want it to be a comfortable conversation. If I'm there taking notes, I might throw someone off their stride because they say, "Oh, I've given that answer. See me write it on a piece of paper or typing."
Yeah.
It could prompt a different reaction in the person than, "Oh, I've done something wrong," kind of reaction. And that's natural, and people do that, based on body language. I might be doing it implicitly through my own kind of body language without even realizing. But for me, the most important thing is engaging in that conversation and maximizing the communication time, because that's ultimately something that I look for in every interview: is how well are we going to communicate? And maybe I'm your line manager, maybe I'm not, maybe you're working in a team that I am hiring into. It's really important to me that I'm going to understand how we're going to communicate. So for me, notes and written information, and you might do something like you might bring someone onto the call to take notes for you, or you might bring someone, you might rotate on the panel. So if you're interviewing with two other people, while one's talking, two might be listening, one might be taking notes. Those are all good ways of doing it. But whatever it is, you've got to agree it up front and ensure that ultimately, it's about giving the candidate the best opportunity to present themselves. And if you're distracting them with your behavior, then you're only shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah. There's nothing worse as a candidate, as you've just said, you say something and suddenly all the heads go down and they start making a note. Did I just rule myself out by saying something stupid, or was that the most amazing thing they've ever heard? And now I've definitely got the role, and they've all made a note like, hire this person. So you're right. The behavior of the interviewer in an interview is really important. And I agree with you, to have that easy conversation thing. And also you touched on something, if you're hiring somebody that you will manage, a big question in my brain is, can I manage you? Are we going to get on? Are you going to take feedback from me? Am I going to be able to steer you? And you need to find that out in the interview.
Absolutely. And that's really important, not just because one of the things that when I was prepping for this, I started to think a little bit about is, your own internal bias. And you might communicate great with this person, but if you go to another stage and they're communicating with someone that they're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis, and you're kind of going around the houses, getting a little bit stuck on certain questions or certain answers, or the flow isn't quite there, or the connection isn't quite there for whatever reason, that is a signal that, okay, maybe one person, either the person asking the question or the answerer, needs to adjust their style, take a different approach. And if I see that adaptability in someone and that kind of reaction to something that's not going quite right, that's if anything, it's a positive for me, because it shows that you're aware, it shows you're listening to what's going on, and you've also got the flexibility to kind of adapt your style based on the person you're talking to. And that's really important. And again, it kind of comes back to that thing of certain stock answers will get you unstuck because you're so rigid in your communication style that you've got nowhere to go when you get backed into a corner.
Yeah. I wanted to dive back into something that we've both mentioned a few times. One is, bias, unconscious bias. I don't really want to dive into that. That's a whole episode on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But also gut feel. And when you and I were preparing for this, we both spoke about gut feel. I feel gut feel is very important. It's very anti-AI. AI is extraordinarily digital. Gut feel is much more human. And you're coached almost not to go to your gut feel. You should be looking at data. But I know myself, I've sat in interviews and thought, my gut feel just says something's not right here. Or my gut feel says, this is a great candidate. What's your view on gut feel? And, how do you marry up data and bias and gut feel and reach the right conclusion?
Yeah, I think if the first thing that you've got to do when you are a hiring manager, particularly if you're a new hiring manager coming out and just getting into this process for the first time, is really work out which one are you, because as a person, you're more likely to lean into, are you more data centric? Are you more, you're looking at the measurable aspects of the person, versus are you a more intuitive, gut feel sort of person? I think I'm probably 70-30 in favor of intuition and gut over data. I think why you want to have a balance is, your data might seriously contradict your gut feel. And if that is a scenario, then you kind of got to take a little bit of a step back and go, okay, why is this so off? And, force yourself to be a little bit more analytical and lean into that aspect of it. But generally, both should support each other and both will support each other to a certain degree. The certain data points can be used to reinforce your gut feel on certain things. The reason that I lean more into that side than the data-centric aspect is because I think you can take data and weave it into any narrative that you want, it's provided that it is maybe diffuse enough or you've got enough data points to kind of say, well, actually, no, I think, we kind of lean into data as a bit of a source of truth and justification for things. But if you're just creating a narrative around it that maybe is preferential to your own bias or things that you're looking for, then kind of redundant anyway, which is why you got to be careful how you use it. You got to have lots of people looking at that same data, giving the different possible interpretations of it. And then I ultimately feel that you end up back at a point of gut feel anyway, because you might have conflict. You might have data that isn't strong enough to completely give you a solid yes, no. So there's always going to be an aspect of gut feel in your outcome anyway. But I like to feel that the way I structure interviews and the way I ask questions, I'm getting all the information I need up front and all the data that I need up front, so that the last thing I need to do is tune into my own intuitions and gut feel and make the final outcome based on that.
Sure. Let's think about the job seeker. You've now got this beautiful artifact. How do you think a job seeker should use the artifacts to prepare for interviews?
Use it to get an understanding of the breadth of things that someone might be trying to understand from you. A question on the surface about a certain technical aspect or a certain scenario-based ones are the best, in my opinion, might seem like a very surface level question, but really they're looking at your ability to arrive at an outcome, or they might be you're looking at your ability to answer a question with relevance and efficiency, or they might be looking at a specific problem that they have when they're in their own space that they are trying to address and assess your suitability for. It's going to be a combination of all those things. So when you are answering, have in mind that those are going to be different characteristics of the answer that you're going to want to lean into depending on who you're talking to. So for me, if you're looking at this cheat sheet as a job seeker, what I would like you to be able to get out of it is taking a question that you've probably answered before, thinking about maybe an answer that you've given, and then thinking about the different ways that you could potentially answer that to highlight different things in yourself. And again, you might, as an applicant, lean into the points that you can speak with the most authority on, and that might be in our sphere, your technical capabilities. But if you lean too strongly into one area of an answer, then you're going to miss your opportunity to convince someone that you are a well-rounded individual and you can communicate and work in a team, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you're an applicant, look at the sheet, think about different ways that you might answer the same questions.
And you might, of course, realize that the answer you've been given forever is the wrong answer. You're actually sinking your chances.
And it could be the wrong answer at the wrong time, right? It could be an answer that you've given in one scenario and it worked really well, and then you give it to another person, they, don't resonate with it at all. So, that it's that prep work, and there's questions in there that you can ask of not just, there's questions in there that not just you would expect to see at interview, but it's questions that you would expect to ask of pre-interview, and how do I tease out the things that are going to be relevant for me to draw upon. So there's work in there that you could do to make your pre-work better as an applicant as well, and give yourself the best chance at succeeding at the interview stage. So yeah, it's all in your prep work, but also how you're going to structure your answers.
Sam, what if after all of this preparation, me as a candidate, I've been through all of this, I've looked at all of the questions, I've got a great idea for what the hiring manager might be looking for, but I'm given a question that just blindsides me. I haven't got a Scooby. What should I do?
Yeah, it's bound to happen at least once. It might even happen multiple times in the same interview. You never know. Take a deep breath. It's not an opportunity to kind of just say, let me reel off something and let me give you a bullshitty answer that I think you want to hear. just try and actually take a step back, break down the question and think, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not, this isn't a situation that I've been in, but this is what I would do. And use it as an opportunity to lay out what you think you would do, because there's always going to be aspects of every role. And a good hiring manager will understand this. You've not done. And all that they want to see and all that they, or I would care about is as a hiring manager is, are you able to break down the problem? Are you able to justify why you would do certain things? And are you able to kind of round it off in a way that says, okay, maybe that's not 100% right, but I think over time I would iterate and fine tune and get to a better, more concrete methodology that is my own and an opinion that is my own on that particular question. So, yeah, don't treat it as a chance to bullshit, because remember, you've got a finite amount of time with this person, and as soon as I sense someone's not trying to waste my time, but maybe is unintentionally wasting the time that we have, then that's quite a negative thing for me.
So it's a balance of, here's my answer based on experience and what I've previously done, so I can evidence me and what I've my experience, aligned with some forward thinking. This would be my behavior. This is how I would treat something if it came up.
Yeah, and anything you don't know the answer to is an opportunity to show that you can break down a problem. I think that's probably the best way to put it. It's an opportunity to say that you're not going to know everything, but you are going to give it a try. And that's a really positive thing to come out of a question that you don't know the answer to.
Sure. And then as a hiring manager, I know myself that when you have lined up your 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is, candidates that you're going to interview, they sometimes go off in a different direction. They're not quite going where you want. So you need to adapt your approach. How do you use this framework to just take a bit of a course correction, say, well, we need to now start asking some slightly different questions of the candidates?
Yeah, I think there's two things that you could do, right? So one thing is, don't be afraid to maybe stop the question in its tracks and steer towards something that you're looking forward to. Looking for in a particular answer, or maybe you've not phrased the question in a way that the candidate naturally understands. So, I have in previous interviews said, let me rephrase the question slightly whilst the candidate's giving their answer, and it steers them back onto the right track, because ultimately I care about giving them the best opportunity to answer the question that I've asked them. But I think maybe if you're seeing a repeat pattern and you're getting the same things that are not going quite right with certain questions, you've got to and a natural reaction might be to think, well, the candidates that are coming through aren't right for me. But actually, maybe the questions that I'm asking as the hiring manager aren't quite right. So it's a little bit of balance, and have that conversation with the people that are bringing you candidates and CVs, and work out, say, okay, I'm not getting so much of this. Maybe I should be asking the question in this way, or I should pick an entirely different entry point or angle for those the attributes that I'm trying to unsurface from that cheat sheet. And that's a great way that you could use it is to say, okay, maybe here's 3 or 4 characteristics or traits that I'm looking for. I've asked these 3 questions, but they're not telling me what I need to know. Maybe I'll try question number 4 or question number 5, and that will give me a different entry point, but will still hopefully entice the same information that I need.
Sure. Sam, the asset you've left behind is incredible. I think it's going to be really, really useful both for candidates and hiring managers. But to wrap it up, what's one thing that a candidate should bear in mind? What's the most important thing that they should think about when they're going into a process?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to put your finger on, because it can very much depend on the role. But the one thing that I was thinking about this a lot before we started talking was, the thing that ties it all together is how genuine can you be and how genuine are you during the process? And that touches every stage, right? It's, are you genuine with the people that you are meeting about the role? Why do you want the role? Why do you care? Are you there because you want to get some interview practice in? Are you there because you genuinely considering a career change? Are you there because you're ready to take the next step? Be open, be communicative, and be genuine, and don't bullshit people, because it's not going to serve you in the long run. So that might be your genuine aspect with the recruitment process. And then an interview, again, it comes back to, I want to get a sense of who you are as a person. I don't want to hear how well you can reel off certain answers about certain things. I want to understand the person that I'm talking to, because if we're going to have a long-term working relationship, I need to fundamentally understand you as a person. And being genuine with your with interviewers and people that are working with you at that process, inherently you're buying yourself quite a lot of capital quite quickly, because you're building trust, you're building a sense of understanding, and you're kind of ticking those things off very, very early, so that then you can focus on the things that really make you stand out as an individual, rather than trying to have to continually convince people that, no, I am genuinely very excited. I am genuinely very enthusiastic. And the more you have to repeat those kind of stock phrases, the less genuine it becomes.
You're right. And as someone who's done hundreds, if not thousands of interviews, if you're a candidate, like, believe me, I know the minute you're starting to bullshit and when you're not being authentic, and you're just ruling yourself out. So don't even go there.
Yeah, and it's a really hard line to come back from as well. So I think just get what you want to say up front and be clear, and don't try and steer too far away from things you're not comfortable with, because that will only serve you poorly in the future and long-term relationships as well.
And what should the hiring manager do? What's the one thing that you would like hiring managers who are listening to this, what's the one thing they should take away from this?
So my advice to hiring managers, and this is purely based on how I hire and how I interview and how I like to build teams more generally. I think the team building aspect for me is the most exciting part of my job. Be very, very clear on what your definition of good looks like, and then get everybody invested in that, because you might have had success in a certain way, other people might have had success in another way, but you are looking for ultimately something very, very consistent that is a proven pattern in particular organizations. And that will change over time, right? That will change in the organizations that you're working in. But be very, very clear on what your definition of good is, and get everybody at every stage of that hiring process invested in that. And that might be, you might pick 3 characteristics amongst that definition that you're going to really hone in on, and then keep those at the forefront of everybody's mind throughout that interview process, or throughout the hiring process, and that will yield more success more quickly than kind of flip flopping or not being prepared to go into that hiring process.
That's great advice, Sam. Thank you. And if people want to reach out to you and talk to you more and talk to you directly about this framework and your views on hiring, how should they do that?
Well, I'm happy for anybody and everybody to reach out, because it's a subject that I really enjoy talking about. And for me, in my role, it's probably the part I enjoy the most, because over time you start to see teams evolve and you start to see people work together in ways that maybe you hadn't even expected that they would. So it's a really, really kind of exciting experience to be a part of when you are building these teams out. But if people want to talk about it, I'm more than happy to just have 10-minute conversations, or for people to reach out over email, which I'll leave, and LinkedIn and that sort of things. But yeah, I'm genuinely happy to talk to anybody and everybody about this sort of stuff, because it's really fun.
Thank you. And I echo your feeling. For me, hiring is also one of the best parts of this job. And when you step back and you look at people that you've hired or teams that have formed, you kind of go, yeah, I did that. It's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very human, in a sector and an industry like technology, where everything's very in the detail quite a lot of the time. Bringing a very human aspect to it is something that I really, really enjoy, and something that I try and give everybody involved a sense of feeling of towards the end, and not that it's been some arduous slog and painful, and hopefully it's been fun and beneficial, most importantly, for everybody.
Thank you, Sam. Preparing for a podcast like this is a lot of work. So thank you so much for everything that you've put in. We spent a long time preparing and making sure that we are, we've got everything covered. Your asset is amazing. You've spent a lot of time putting it together. I encourage anybody who's watching or listening to go and download it. You can find it at buildyouredge.org/downloads. You can find all of our downloads there. Sam, hiring is, as we've both discussed, it's the best part of the job for a hiring manager. But right now, with the world as it is, and the thousands of people who go for every job opportunity, the shortage of jobs, it's probably the worst part of a job seeker's life right now. If you're out of work, this is really, really tough. So I think that the asset that you've brought and left behind, and your thought and your ideas are so helpful to people on both sides of that equation. So thank you so much indeed for spending the time with me today.
No, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on. And yeah, please feel free to reach out if you've got anything hiring related you want to talk to me about. So thanks everyone for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. See you next time.